Welcome back to the podcast. Today's episode is one that I wish someone explained to me years and years and years ago, because it would have saved me a lot of guilt, burnout, and self-abandon. If this is your first time listening to Real Talk Fitness with AMPT, I am your host, Ashley Cummins. I'm a mum of 2 energetic boys, a wife to my amazing husband, Steve. I also compete in powerlifting, high rocks and CrossFit events myself, all whilst running a business and supporting my members and my staff. So what we're actually talking about in today's episode is what actually happens when you start saying no. Not the fluffy version, not the Instagram quote version, but the real reason people start reacting the way they do when you finally start to set boundaries. And here's the truth. Most people aren't ready to hear this. But when you say no, people aren't reacting to your boundary. They're reacting to the loss of access they used to have to you prior to you having boundaries. So let's dive in. When you actually say no, why do other people react the way they do? Now, I used to rack my brain about this and then used to feel so guilty that I would say yes. And over time, I realized that I was losing myself. When I was saying yes to them, I was saying no to my family. And to me, really. And nobody talked to me or told me about why I was feeling this way or why people would push back and that emotional tug and pull that I would feel when I would say no would eat me alive to the point I would say yes. So when you start saying no, people don't suddenly think you've become rude, cold, or selfish. They feel unsettled because their access has changed. And what I mean by that is you started respecting your time, your emotional availability, your reliability. And this affects them because they were benefiting from your lack of boundaries. So it isn't about you saying no, it's about what they have lost. And it's about the reaction to the fact that they have lost access to you by you saying no. And this can appear in family, this can appear in your relationships, this can appear in your friendships. And this can even appear in anyone's job or even for those that are running a business. So shout out to all you guys that are still out there grinding in small business because this is a massive one. When you start to say no, when you used to say yes, those people that benefit from your lack of boundaries start to push back. But those that respect you for you will respect your boundaries. So even if it slightly creates discomfort, especially for people who benefited from the old version of you, here's the reframe that changes everything. People aren't upset that you have boundaries. They're upset that the old version of you is no longer available. You changed the rules without asking permission, right? And that's absolutely fucking bizarre when you think you've got to ask permission to put yourself first. And just like anything, humans don't like unexpected change, particularly when the old setup worked in their favor. So you'll find that people will start reacting in guilt tripping you or anger or withdrawal. You might even hear, you've changed, you're being selfish, this is not like you. And honestly, they're right. You've changed, you've grown. You started to realize that your life is worth living and you are valued as well. Now, this is where it all clicked to me, right? And I like to use the toddler analogy, and those that know me know that I like to use a lot of analogies. But something occurred to me is that when you've been around a toddler, have you ever noticed that they don't hesitate to say no? They say no so freely. They have no fear of disappointing others. They don't justify what they want. They don't feel guilty for taking up space. and they don't try to manage everyone else's emotions. You never look at a toddler and think, wow, what a people pleaser that little man or little girl is. We don't do that. And you know why? Because people pleasing is not natural. It is a learned behavior from our old programming. You're probably thinking, for all the people pleasers out there, when did people pleasing begin? Now, as an adult, we all run a program, and something that is really, really fascinating and something that I learned in all my study of NLP is that our brain is programmed by the age of 7. Now, when I say programmed, is that we learn behaviors, patterns to fit in and keep safe. So you're probably thinking, when did this begin? It starts from the moment that we realize by saying no, love can be withdrawn, or approval by saying yes, you're going to be accepted, or if you cause conflict, you're going to feel unsafe. Saying no has emotional consequences is another thing that we've learned. But as kids, we learn things like be good, don't upset people, be helpful, keep the peace. Now, those 4 things can generally often lead to people pleasing, right? Don't upset people. So if I say no, is this going to upset somebody? Keep the peace. If this is going to cause conflict, I'm just going to say yes because I've learned to keep the peace. And slowly, subconsciously, we learn saying yes keeps me safe. So we adapt. Now, this doesn't mean we're weak. This is because we are wired for connection. As human beings, as a pack animal, we are wired to fit in. So people pleasing is a survival strategy. And this part matters. So people pleasing is not a flaw. It's become a coping mechanism. At some point, it worked, right? It helped you avoid conflict, keep relationships, feel accepted, stay emotionally safe. It once protected you. And now, if you're listening to today's podcast, it's now costing you your energy, your boundaries, and your sense of self. So please, if you're a people pleaser out there listening to today's podcast, I'd love for you to share this podcast because that's how we can help change other people's lives as well. And I'm was a huge people pleaser up until now. Until I realized that when people push back, it's not a me problem, it's a them problem. It's their upset that they're no longer getting what they used to get by my lack of boundaries. Those that matter will respect your boundaries. And in life, we cannot please everybody. There's this saying called the faces of they. So they might think this or they might think that. And in reality, they're not thinking anything about you. And to be honest, it's not really your problem what they think. There is no right or wrong in life, there just is. You're probably thinking, when I say no, why do boundaries feel so threatening to others? So when you say no now, you're not just setting a boundary. You're breaking an unspoken agreement. You're changing a role people are comfortable with. You're removing your predictability. And you're forcing others to regulate themselves instead of leaning on you. So of course they're going to react. Not because you're wrong, but because they haven't adjusted yet. And getting back to the faces of they, that's not a you problem, that's a them problem. And here's the line that changes everything. Someone's reactions to your boundaries tells you how much they relied on your lack of a boundary. So I'll repeat that again. Someone's reaction to your boundary or you saying no tells you how much they relied on your lack of boundaries or your people-pleasing habits. The stronger the reaction, the more access they had to you before. And this can feel uncomfortable because we're conditioned to smooth things over, be the emotional glue, fix discomfort, or often a lot of people try and take on the responsibility for how others feel. So when someone is upset after you saying no, your nervous system kicks in and it says, fix it, make it better, go back. It feels uncomfortable, but this is your growth moment. You're allowed to let people feel disappointed. Discomfort is not danger. You are not responsible for other people's emotions to your actions. You're only responsible to how you respond. And again, for all the people pleasers out there that constantly say yes because it causes less discomfort, when you're saying yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And the sad part about that is you're saying no to you. Now, this isn't going to be easy to start. You need to help yourself adjust. Be kind to yourself. Respect your boundaries. Don't punish yourself for choosing you. This is something that I did time and time and time again. And I've read a lot of books of late, and one of the books that I've read recently, which I didn't think the lesson that it'd teach me has anything to do with this, but it's called The Art of Spending Money by Morgan Housel. And he speaks about kids, and this really hit home for me, raising 2 boys and always putting my business before them. And saying that out loud on this podcast with you guys listening really kind of hits a sore spot, because becoming aware of that, it broke me. It's like they want to, mum, watch this, mum, watch this. Oh, sorry, I've just got to reply back to this person. And that person is getting more access to me than my kids. And what they're going to remember is they're not as important as my work, right? So there's one thing that I needed to remind myself is I'm not responsible for managing other people's emotions anymore. I'm not responsible for how they react to my boundaries, because at one point they were benefiting from my lack of boundaries. And not once, again, remember the faces of they're not thinking about me, they're thinking about them. So you're not responsible for managing how other people feel about you. And just like a toddler who confidently says no, you're relearning something that was never wrong to begin with, but you're relearning how to put yourself first. So just to recap, why saying yes to everybody is costing you everything. Every yes is a no to something else. And as I stated before, it's usually yourself. So why we say yes when we want to say no? It's a fear of rejection, abandonment, conflict, or being selfish. People pleasing is often a trauma response. It's not really who you are. So next time when you go to say yes, I want you to ask yourself, what am I saying no to if I say yes to this? A really good journal prompt is, where in my life am I over-giving and under-receiving? Remember that boundaries aren't mean, they're self-respect. Boundaries are instructions for how to treat you. So while we talk about saying no, I want to talk about boundaries aren't walls, they're self-respect. By creating boundaries, you're not pushing people away. They're about keeping yourself intact. A wall versus a boundary, there's a distinction, and it is huge. A wall says, I'm not letting anyone in. A boundary says, I decide what gets access to me. Walls are built from fear. Boundaries are built from clarity. When people say, I tried boundaries and it didn't work, what they usually did was shut down, avoid, disappear, emotionally detach. That's not a boundary, that's protection mode. A boundary allows connections with limits. A wall removes connection entirely. Now, I want to talk about why people who benefit from your lack of boundaries resist them, right? So, as I said earlier, is that generally the people that benefit from your lack of boundaries are going to be the one that resist them the most. when you place them in or when you say no. So that this is uncomfortable, but it's really important. People who benefited from your overgiving will feel unsettled when it stops. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because the dynamic has changed. They're used to your flexibility, your availability, your emotional labor, and your automatic yes. So when you introduce a boundary, it feels like a loss to them. Now remember, that's a them problem, not a you problem. And instead of processing their discomfort, they project it onto you. And this is where the guilt trips come from. This is where they might put up walls. They might guilt trip you into feeling bad. And boundaries don't change others, they change you. Boundaries are not instructions for other people to behave differently. They're instructions for you, and it's always about you. You stop over-explaining yourself. Stop over-committing. Stop trying to rescue, and stop trying to fix. And when you change your behavior, the relationships either adjust or they reveal their true self. So again, going back to if they've been benefiting from your lack of boundaries and then all of a sudden they get upset when you put boundaries in place and they ghost you, that reveals a lot about them. But both outcomes are information. Saying no, you do not require to justify. This is a big one where I used to be like, unfortunately I can't do that because I have this, and this, and this. And this is a big one for me running a small business. I used to feel that I had to justify saying no because I felt bad. But the truth is I don't. I don't need to give a reason. I don't need to apologize. Because underneath that all is if you explain yourself, they won't be upset. But your boundaries don't need permission. Another emotion that used to come up is guilt. The guilt and fear after I say no. And this doesn't mean I've done anything wrong. It means I did something new. It's like a muscle, right? When we're in the gym and we do squats, at first it hurts. The second time it feels easier. And then over time, you build up strength. Saying no is no different. Now, guilt shows up after you set a boundary because most people expect guilt to come before they say no. But it hits after, once you've broken that pattern, because your nervous system says this isn't familiar. This doesn't feel healthy. Your nervous system starts to freak out. When you change a long-standing pattern, your body interprets it as risk. So going back to the pattern that we've learned in our programming is that we've learned by keeping risks at bay, we're safe. So the guilt, anxiety, and the second guessing shows up. You start overthinking. You want to backtrack. You want to fix it. This doesn't mean you need to undo the boundary. It means your system is recalibrating. You're reprogramming yourself from your old you versus the evolved you. The old you kept the peace, avoided discomfort, stayed small to stay safe. This new you, if you're listening to the podcast, you can tolerate discomfort, trust yourself, let others feel their feelings. Growth feels unsafe before it feels empowering. So if there's one thing I would love for you to take away from today's podcast is sit with discomfort without self-abandoning yourself. This is a skill. You don't need to numb it. You don't need to fix it. You don't explain it. You let it pass because feelings are temporary. But constant saying yes when you really should be saying no is permanent. When you're saying yes to something, you're also saying no to something else. Discomfort is the price of growth. Resentment is the price of avoiding it. A few journal prompts, if you want to pause this episode and write them down, is what am I afraid will happen if I say no? Has this actually happened before? You don't owe clarity to people who benefit from your confusion. You don't need to over-explain yourself. This life is yours to live. So when you start saying no, you're going to get more energy, clearer priorities, better relationships, the real ones stay around. Less emotional eating, less burnout, less resentment. And the biggest one is you start trusting yourself. The strongest people aren't the most available, they're the most aligned with themselves. So as usual, if this episode stirred something in you, I want you to hear this clearly. Setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish, it makes you honest. And honesty will always disrupt people who benefited from your silence. Let them adjust, let them feel. You don't need to shrink to keep the peace anymore. And if this episode resonated, share it with someone who needs permission to say no. Or better yet, sit with it yourself and notice where you're still overgiving. I hope this has helped you. And until next time, keep it real and keep true to yourself.